Thank you for joining us for today's online seminar. My name is Jay Shamsani, and I'll be chairing today's session. Our topic today, which is aptly also the title of the webinar, is the Metaverse in China. This afternoon's session is hosted by the University of Hong Kong's Asian Institute of International Financial Law, or IFL as we call it, HKU FinTech, and the East Asian International Economic Law and Policy Program here on campus. Today's speaker is a highly regarded authority on all things crypto and fintech. Oriol Caudevilla is an honorary fellow at HKU's IFL, and he also works as a board director and secretary general at the Global Impact FinTech Forum. His articles have been published and cited by international media outlets such as Reuters, Forbes Middle East, the SCMP here in Hong Kong, Outlook India, China Daily, the Asian Investor, Forecast News, and Coin Telegraph. And those are just some of the highlights. I won't belabor you with his entire bio. For the past year, Oriol has hosted the Digital Tomorrow podcast, which releases a new episode every 2 weeks. He has 10,000 YouTube followers whose his video views reach an average audience of about 1,500 per edition. Oriol is also a well-known international speaker and was named the Asian FinTech Speaker of the Year in 2021 by Faster Community.
Thank you very much, Ajay, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today. I would like to thank you, Ajay, as I said, for introducing me. And well, I would like to thank the Asian Institute of International Financial Law at the University of Hong Kong for hosting me again. I already had the pleasure in the past of participating in some webinars organized by you. I was talking a couple of years ago about digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and taxation. And this time, actually, the original idea was perhaps to cover central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, which are, I would say, my main area of interest and research. But then the idea kind of evolved, and we decided to focus more on the metaverse in China, because this is an evolving, very interesting area. And at the end of the day, many of these areas are to some extent connected, intertwined. So that's why, well, I decided to focus maybe on this other area that I think perhaps is maybe even less common, or I don't know, but I thought it might be interesting to provide some insights about this as well. So without further ado, I'm going to proceed by sharing this PowerPoint that I prepared. The idea would be for me to speak for around 40-45 minutes, and then leave the floor open for all of you to ask me any questions that you may have. You will see that the PowerPoint is actually very long, but I will try to provide all the information as briefly as possible. And if there is any doubt that I cannot solve during the event, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards, and I will try to solve all your doubts after the event. I will also be sharing with you this presentation and any relevant links and relevant materials as well. So don't worry if you feel like I'm going too fast sometimes. Please don't feel overwhelmed, because I will be sharing everything with you at the end, and I will be sharing solving any doubts that you may have. Well, as I said, this is the topic for today, the metaverse in China. So obviously, we're going to look at the metaverse in general, and then we're going to look at how or what the metaverse looks like in mainland China mostly. And I say mainland China because, as you know, the metaverse, Web3, all these areas look quite different in mainland China compared to Hong Kong. So this is why it is important to remember that I'm going to focus mainly on mainland China. When it comes to myself, in case you want to follow me, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Feel free to check my website or my YouTube channel as well if you want, in case you want to dig deeper on any of these topics. That's the poster of this talk, but that's not more important for now. And this is a quick disclaimer. Basically, I know it's not very important to remind that, because I know there's going to be no issue, but just in case, I always remind my audience that my opinions are just that, my opinions based on my experiences or on some research that I'm going to be citing, on some reports, but they are just that, opinions, and not legal or investment advice in any case. So please bear that in mind. And that's a summary of my talk today. I'm going to be introducing the topic briefly myself as well, even though AJ already introduced me before. I'm going to be introducing the metaverse, and then I'm going to be talking a bit about the technologies behind the metaverse, risks of the metaverse in regulations, metaverse in Web3, and the metaverse in mainland China. Even though it's number 8, actually, the metaverse in mainland China is actually going to be one of the most important and the longest part of my presentation. You'll notice that some of the previous parts will be actually dealt with very quickly. About myself, I'm not going to dwell on that for longer. Ajay already introduced me, so I think that everything about myself was already said, so I'm going to skip this part. Just a quick glance at my podcast. Well, the speak is not updated because there's 1,000 more followers, but the whole idea is the same. I have this podcast, which also has a YouTube channel that you can Google if you want and check. I'm not advertising myself in the sense that, I'm not making any money out of this, but I think it might be interesting for you to check it if you want, because I interview lots of people, CEOs, central bankers. I have a channel within my podcast on central banking, one on blockchain. And well, you will see that I covered recently, for example, as well, the metaverse in China with Professor Hongyi Chen from Zhejiang University. I covered CBDCs. So I'm sure that you will see many familiar faces that I interviewed. So in case you want to dig deeper on any of these topics, I encourage you to check my videos and then my website. But that's not more important for now. This is just in case you want to check which topics I normally speak about, which conferences I participated in these last few years, etc. Now, digging deeper into the topic, which is the reason why you are here today. As I said before, I'm going to try to be looking at what is the situation of the metaverse in China, especially given that, as you know, usually digital assets are a very important part of the metaverse. And as you know, China has adopted a tougher stance towards cryptocurrencies, especially since 2021. So I will try to provide you with some insights about how this slightly different or different metaverse works in China compared to other metaverses in other countries. But I'm not just going to be looking at that. I'm going to be looking at the very beginning, which is, what is the metaverse? And I think that's actually quite interesting and important to discuss, because I know that some or many of you will already be experts on that, and you will find my information to be maybe not that relevant or new. But I think it's important to start from the very beginning, especially in an area like this one, where all the concepts, all the terminology is actually quite or very new, to the point that we could perfectly say that the metaverse is a work in progress. It is still under construction. It's very important to remember that, because I will now provide you with some definitions, some ideas about the metaverse. But to be honest, what's a metaverse now and what it will be perhaps in a few years from now, it may be different. We are talking about areas that evolve very, very fast. Now, in case you want to dig deep on this topic, as I said before, the latest episode of my podcast was with Professor Hongyi Chen, which, as you can see, is the managing director of Meta Intelligence and founding director of the Metaverse campus at Zhejiang University International Business School. And well, in this episode, we covered in half an hour some ideas about the metaverse in China. So, of course, the content I covered there was not the same exactly I'm going to cover today or anything like that. But in case you want to dig deeper, feel free to please check that one. Now, starting from the very beginning, the term metaverse was coined in a science fiction novel called Snow Crash, written by Neil Stephenson over 30 years ago in 1992, where humans as programmable avatars interact with each other and software agents in a three-dimensional virtual space that uses a metaphor of the real world. So I don't mean by that the metaverse was invented that day, but the term metaverse was invented there. And then there were some metaverses or quasi-metaverses before the metaverses that we're talking about. For example, 20 years ago, which is a lot when we talk about tech-related topics, Second Life was invented. It started as a virtual world and quickly attracted over 1 million users, which created a virtual economy of $500 million. So as you can see, this idea has been around for a while. But I would say that even though virtual worlds are not a new idea, the rebranding of Facebook into Meta back in October 2021, 1 year and a half ago, put to some extent an intense focus on virtual worlds and the metaverse. I mean, the pandemic, we all know that turbocharged a tech and fintech revolution worldwide. I mean, we all know that. We all saw how mainstream areas like, let's say, cryptocurrencies, NFTs became during the pandemic. And the metaverse was also one of them, one of these areas that became much more relevant because people became, to some extent, much more tech savvy or tech oriented. I don't mean by that the pandemic invented these areas, they created this area. I'm not saying that, but it is true that it raised a bigger interest in these areas. We see, for example, that a concert held in Fortnite was seen by millions of people. So as you can see, there are many practical examples of that. This is one possible definition of the metaverse that I use in some of my articles, which is that the metaverse could be described as a digital reality combining aspects of social media, online gaming, augmented reality, AR, VR as well, cryptocurrencies, and others to allow users to interact virtually. AR, for example, overlays visual elements, sound, and other sensory input onto real-world settings to enhance the user experience. And then cryptocurrencies are an important element as well. But as I said before, and you already know, this is a part of the metaverse that is not present in China. But still, generally speaking, cryptocurrencies usually play a role in the metaverse, NFTs as well. So in other words, we could be saying as well that the metaverse refers to this concept of a highly immersive virtual world where people can reside or interact through their digital selves, for example, avatars, and socialize, etc. The thing is, what I said before, I mean, many people talk about the metaverse. You will find many reports talking about how companies can leverage the metaverse and so forth and so on. But the thing is, the definition is not yet very concrete. I provided you with one possible definition, but to be honest, the definition is not yet very, very concrete, very determined, because it's actually a very broad concept that covers many more aspects. So it's quite difficult to find a uniform definition. So please bear that in mind. I'm just providing you with some elements of a possible definition, but we are still at the beginning stage of the development of the metaverse. To some extent, just like what the internet meant for us over 20 years ago. At the very beginning, the definition of the internet was quite narrow compared to what it is now. So it's pretty much the same idea. To the same point or extent that, there was some criticism about the internet 20 years ago as well. I saw the other day, for example, on a LinkedIn post, where I clipped from a newspaper, I think it was from 1998, maybe, where that newspaper said that the internet was actually a passing fad, whose interest would diminish and vanish even in a few months or years. And then, of course, as you can tell and see, that didn't happen. I mean, actually quite the opposite. So the metaverse may be actually following the same path. Of course, I mean, it's impossible to predict the future. We don't have a crystal ball, crystal glass, so it's impossible to determine for sure what will happen. But that's what most people in the area think, that this will keep evolving. Some critics say that it is just an existing concept offered as though it were a new one, rebranding existing technologies like VR, AR, AI under a new umbrella. But to some extent, this perhaps might be what the metaverse is really about. I mean, the metaverse is not a new technology. There is no technology called per se the metaverse. No? The metaverse is that thing that I said before that combines, that leverages several technologies, an important amount of them, to create this new virtual world. So perhaps this criticism is actually it's actually true, but at the same time, perhaps it's simply what the metaverse is. I mean, perhaps we don't need to dig much deeper than that. Then there is this interesting report called Value Creation in the Metaverse, drafted by McKinsey and published last year in June, which I shared back in the day on my LinkedIn profile, but I'm sharing the link with you as well here. And at the end of this conference, of this webinar, I'm going to be sharing this one with Flora and Ajay as well, in case they want to reshare it with you. This report provides some insights about the metaverse industry. For example, it says that by 2030, it is plausible that more than 50% of live events could be held in the metaverse. And more than 80% of commerce could be impacted by something consumers do there in the metaverse, from discovering brands to visiting a virtual store well, that's a prediction, of course. It may happen or may not happen, but still, I mean, it's a prediction made by McKinsey in this report. So I think it's worth to have a look at it. Also following that report, most learning and development could happen in a metaverse environment, as could most virtual or hybrid collaboration. McKinsey expects as well that the average internet user will spend up to 6 hours per day in metaverse-related experiences by 2030. I think that the summary perhaps would be that the metaverse is too big to be ignored, even if you don't like it. I mean, it's the same that I say about cryptocurrencies, for example. You don't need to like this. You just need to understand this phenomenon. My point is, and I'm usually saying that like a lot whenever I talk about regulating digital assets and DeFi, the thing is, please do not think that you need to be like a crypto enthusiast or metaverse enthusiast in order to attend webinars like this one or talk about this topic. I think you simply need to understand these areas because from many perspectives, from the perspective of an economist, of a regulator, of bankers, you need to know about those areas as much as you can. And of course, you're not going to get much from a 1-hour webinar like mine, just some ideas, but you need to dig much deeper after that about the metaverse, Web3, digital assets, attend conferences. No, I was speaking at the Hong Kong Tech Week, so go to that conference next year as well, go to the other conferences, because you will get acquainted. If you are not, I mean, of course, many of you are already acquainted, but if you're not acquainted enough, you will get more acquainted to these topics and ideas, even if you don't like them. You don't need to like the metaverse. I know that many people think that the metaverse is actually a passing fad, there is no real value. I mean, you are free to think that. But before thinking that, before jumping to that conclusion, try to understand the whole ecosystem. Because, I mean, it will quite likely have an impact on our lives, on our businesses. So it is important for policymakers, consumers to understand these areas, these phenomena. I mean, perhaps the impact in the end will be more limited than expected or bigger than expected. You never know that, but there will be an impact for sure, nonetheless. You will find on these next two slides some references to this report. Basically, I mean, when it comes to the opportunities, when it comes to how consumers are engaged in brands, in the metaverse, etc. You know, but use cases companies are implementing in this area. You see, for example, meetings in the metaverse, events or conferences, learning, marketing, product design. And then you can find here as well the 10 layers of the metaverse according to McKinsey. I mean, virtual worlds, platforms, infrastructure, enablers, which include, of course, payments, identity, security, privacy, and government. So as you can see, the metaverse is an area that that intertwines, combines many different aspects. So there is perhaps more the technical side, when it comes to how to create, technically speaking, the digital world, the infrastructure, how to access this world. But then there is also there are also other areas, payments, for example, which is much more an economy-related area, identity, compliance, privacy, governance, cybersecurity. So it pretty much involves many new, or many, not new, but different areas. So according to this report, and this follows exactly what I said before, even though the decision is still quite fluid, the consensus tends to be that the metaverse is the next iteration of the internet, becoming something that we will all be immersed in rather than something we just view. Well, that's the idea, right? The idea about the metaverse. In a basic level, the metaverse will have 3 different features: this sense of immersion, real-time interactivity, and user agency. And will also include, in theory, this interoperability across platforms, concurrency with thousands of people interacting simultaneously, and use cases spanning human activity well beyond gaming. And this reference to gaming is actually important. I'm going to get back to this later. One more key idea is that there are not multiple metaverses. And because saying that there are many metaverses is like saying that there are many internets. So the thing is, I know it's quite common for people to say that there are many metaverses. Actually, there are not. I mean, there are many platforms, but not many metaverses in theory. In purity, we should be saying that. So, I mean, I'm sure all those platforms are the Sandbox, Decentraland, Minecraft, Roblox. I mean, you can find many platforms, but like in purity, we wouldn't be talking about different metaverses, but the metaverse is one, like there is one internet, and then there are different platforms. Then you can find here the history of the metaverse as well, which pretty much is what I told you before when it comes to, when the term was coined, in 1992. Then certain movies or books that made reference to this as well. Meta, but it's pretty much what I said before, a little bit more expanded. Then you can find here as well some advances from Web 2 to Web 3, which gave rise to the metaverse. But to be honest, I'm not going to be focusing on this right now, because I'm going to go back to the idea of metaverse and Web 3 later on. So for now, just keep some of these ideas, but I'm going to dig deeper into this. The 10 layers, it's a different way of presenting what I said to you before already, so I'm going to be skipping this one. Now, interesting ideas as well. I told you before, or tried to tell you, what's the metaverse. Now, one key idea as well is what is not the metaverse, and that part is important because, I mean, sometimes, especially in this kind of new areas where definitions tend to be so fluid and fast changing, it is important to look at this from the opposite angle. What's not the metaverse? For example, the metaverse is not AR or VR. AR and VR are ways, technologies leveraged by the metaverse. But the metaverse is not just AR and VR, even though AR and VR can be part of the metaverse. Then the metaverse is not just gaming. Gaming has been critical in seeding the metaverse and also in its development, but the metaverse is not exclusive to gaming. Actually, we'll see later many use cases of the metaverse. Then, and this one is very important, the metaverse is not Web3. Web3 contributes to the metaverse by espousing decentralization, interoperability, but it's not the metaverse. So I'm going to get back to this idea later because it's actually, to me, one of the important ideas of this talk. Please remember that even though the metaverse and Web3 are very related concepts and they intertwine in certain aspects, they are not the same. So please remember that you cannot use both terms and exchange both terms indistinctively because they are not actually the same. Then the metaverse ideally is not just for a small number of users. It can actually be leveraged to reach, as we saw before, actually lots and lots of people. Then I also shared the link to this video, but to be honest, I don't think there's going to be enough time for me to play it. Just in case you want to check it later when I share the presentation with you. It's a short video, well, not so short, but 21 minutes, by The Economist about how will businesses use the metaverse. So I encourage you to check it later on. You can see here, it explains what is the metaverse, opportunities for creative industries, Roblox. Well, it's actually quite interesting for 20 minutes. This one is by Accenture, also quite interesting. It's focusing on banking in the metaverse, so you can check this one as well if you want later. This one is shorter, it's only just 6 or 7 minutes. So please feel free to check it later if you want to dig deeper. As I said, there is not enough time to go through this in detail now because I only got like 1 hour in total, and I still spoke for 20 minutes, but check it later if you want. Now, technologies behind the metaverse. That's actually a quite interesting part to me. As I said before, given that this area has quite a fluid definition, not all of these technologies need necessarily to be part of the metaverse. They can or cannot be part of the metaverse. Usually, these technologies that you can find listed here on my slide are part of the metaverse. For example, blockchain can be part of the metaverse and is part of many metaverses. AR and VR, as I said before, 3D reconstruction, artificial intelligence, which, as you know, is quite all over the media lately after, OpenAI, ChatGPT, 5G and cloud computing, IoT, Internet of Things. So these technologies can be found and are usually found on the metaverse. And well, you will find this slide perhaps to be interesting. It's my favorite novel after KPMG, and it shows you all the core technologies behind the metaverse, the infrastructure, possible applications, etc. So it's a summary of what I said before. Now you see that the core technologies, according to this slide, are artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud services, digital twins, and some of the others that I said before as well, AR, VR, etc. One example of technologies important for the metaverse is blockchain. And well, I mean, I could have chosen any of the other ones, but I chose blockchain because it's the industry, the blockchain industry, the fintech industry, in which I've been working for these last few years. So that's why I chose blockchain. Blockchain is actually a quite new technology. As you know, it was invented to underpin, to support the operations of cryptocurrencies, of Bitcoin more exactly at the very beginning. And then it has evolved to the point that blockchain, the use cases, the applications of blockchain go far beyond those of just cryptocurrency. So it is very important for you to keep that in mind. Blockchain can be applied in many more areas. And actually, one of the key ideas in all my seminars and talks, one of the key ideas that I advocate the most for is that please do not think of blockchain as just the enabler of cryptocurrencies. It's much more than that. Blockchain is being applied and will be applied in many more areas. I think I actually, sorry, I'm going to skip this one. I don't think it's that relevant now. Yeah, this one is more relevant now. As I said before, a blockchain can be used in many other different areas, not just cryptocurrency. It can be used, for example, in insurance, supply chain management, video games, IoT, healthcare, trade finance, supply chain management, CBDCs. So as you can see, yes, it is true that blockchain was invented to support cryptocurrencies. It is true that whenever you talk about blockchain to large audiences, the first thing that comes to their mind is cryptocurrencies. But please bear in mind as well that blockchain is actually being applied to many more areas than just cryptocurrencies. And the metaverse can leverage blockchain as well, in the same way that can leverage the other technologies that I mentioned before. So I just chose a blockchain now as one example of several. Now, moving forward, now that we saw what's the metaverse, what's not the metaverse, technologies behind the metaverse, we are going to have a quick look at the risks of the metaverse. Because, well, I mean, as it happens with most things in life, nothing is risk-free, right? I mean, I can tell you for hours about the potential benefits of the metaverse, how many people will use the metaverse then and here and that. But the thing is, there are, of course, certain risks that can be, of course, mitigated and even avoided, but those risks exist. For example, I mean, the metaverse can imply an increased data collection by third parties, privacy issues, more complex and challenging access and identity management, harassment and assault, cybersecurity risks, widening of the digital divide, regulatory risks. So all these risks exist. So you need to be aware of their existence and be aware of the possible solutions. I mean, I'm not going, of course, to be able to talk in detail about each one of the risks and go through them because it would take us like forever, but at least let's try to have a quick look at some of them and see, well, what they imply or can imply in general. I mean, for example, increased data collection by third parties. Well, metaverse platforms are likely to increase the potential range and amount of personal data that third parties collect. So, well, that's something that people and governments will need to be careful about in the future. Privacy issues. Of course, I mean, metaverse platforms will connect the more or the newer types of data, such as voice recordings, in addition to collecting conventional data. So organizations will need to be careful and consider what data they are collecting and storing and how they can protect it and secure it. Cybersecurity risks. Well, I mean, to be honest, it's what I said before on my slide before. I mean, current web applications already pose cybersecurity threats and risks. So it's pretty much the same idea, no? But you need to be aware that those will exist as well. Harassment and assault, and I discussed that in my podcast with Professor Hongyi Chen as well. The experiences they can feel very real, they can be daunting, but there are certain things that we will need to be careful about, because perhaps the boundaries of what is assault, harassment in those virtual worlds can be a little bit blurred compared to those boundaries in the real world. So that's why proper regulations will need to be put in place by the government, by the platforms themselves, etc. So as you can see, it was a very, very, very quick analysis of the risks. So it was extremely quick, but I just wanted to provide you with some quick ideas. And now one more idea. No, I mean, following the thread of this webinar is that of open metaverses versus closed metaverses. That's important in case you want to dig deeper into these worlds. An open metaverse is that single connected universe where users interact with each other, regardless of which platform they are using. So usually the code is open source. There is no need for a central authority to control the platform. Users can create their own rules and regulations, or create even their virtual world entirely independent of any other. But the downside to open metaverses is that they can be less secure. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the more open it is, the more people can become part of it. The easier people will interact, but also the less secure it will be. I mean, it's like that. So that's a definition of the open metaverse, and also the main downside that it has. Opposed to that, you will find closed metaverses, which are those that, I mean, according to its very own name, are not open to the public. They are usually only accessible, for example, to employees or members of that organization or company that owns that metaverse. For example, and this is just one example of many, Coca-Cola has this Coca-Cola World metaverse only accessible to Coca-Cola employees. And there are many more examples like this one. Closed metaverses provide more controlled and safe user environments compared to open metaverses, because the creator of that metaverse regulates what happens inside, and it can take measures to prevent any dangerous, unwanted activity. But the downside to closed metaverses compared to the open ones would be that closed metaverses tend to be, or will be for sure, less inclusive, making it more difficult to find new ideas, talented people, because it's much more difficult, exclusive to access. So I hope this provides you some clarity when it comes to the difference between open metaverse and closed metaverse. And once again, following the thread, now you should know what's the metaverse, what it's not, closed metaverses, open metaverses, technologies behind this, etc. So now, before talking about Web3 in China, just one quick summary of the regulations that I'm going to actually be skipping this very quickly. The metaverse is still highly regulated, and well, that's a shame, but that's what it is. I mean, it shouldn't surprise us at all. We all know that all these newer areas are actually not well regulated enough. I mean, I had the pleasure of being in a panel at the Hong Kong FinTech Week talking about how to regulate digital assets. And well, even though there is a growing interest from many regulators in regulating digital assets, the thing is that, as you know, the law tends to be quite or much slower than the technology. So this is why it shouldn't surprise us at all to see that these newer areas are not properly regulated. Yes, it takes a while for these new ideas to become part of the law properly. I mean, you know, it's always, or pretty much always, like that. So it is still highly regulated. The introduction of Web3 elements into the metaverse games, for example, is bound to disrupt IP agreements, etc. So there are many areas that should be still covered, like, for example, the definition of theft and illegal use of IP. Well, and lawmakers will need to act in the interest of both asset owners and original IP owners. So it's not going to be completely easy to regulate these areas. Because of what I said before, no, I mean, these areas create new realities, and these new realities also pose new threats. They create new risks. You can see some examples here, for example, here when it comes to NFTs. And to sum up, I mean, the emergence of the metaverse presents a series of complex regulatory challenges, because as new technologies and platforms are developed, those rules and regulations will need to evolve as well. So a new regulatory framework will need to be created, leveraging everything that I said before. So, and these are some areas that will need to be regulated as well: copyright law, tort law, information law, NFTs, tax, contract law, IP. I would say that the summary when it comes to metaverse and regulations is that it is still highly regulated, and regulators are right now much more proactive when it comes to regulating digital assets, Web3, but still it will take a while perhaps to make it to a situation where these areas are properly regulated everywhere. And one downside to regulating these areas is what I said in some of my panels lately as well, and in podcasts. I said this to Ajay as well when I was interviewed in the Regulatory Ramblings podcast at HKU. I said that the main challenge about these areas is that these new areas are supranational realities. So we need I mean, we are asking countries to regulate nationally things that per se are supranational. And that's, of course, always going to be a challenge. It's not impossible. I mean, there are many already supranational regulations, but it's going to be a challenge that will require certain time and perhaps even trial and error in some cases. Now, before focusing on China, I would like to cover briefly the metaverse and Web3, because I told you before that the metaverse and Web3 are not the same, which is true, but at the same time, they are very connected in many ways. So, moving forward, you will see that Web3 is the decentralized internet built on distributed technologies like blockchain, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, rather than being centralized on servers owned by individuals or corporations. So Web3 could be described or defined as the decentralized internet, which leverages DAOs, blockchain. Web3 is the third major revolution on the internet, or it is thought to be that, after the Web 1, World Wide Web, and the Web 2, a user-generated web. So the idea is pretty much what I told you now. The server systems and networks, in theory, will be owned by the users themselves. So as you can see, it's an evolution in theory of Web 1 and Web 2. Now, the thing is, I don't think that there is any issue about the concept of Web 3. The issue is, why do some people, or many people sometimes, think or associate that the metaverse and Web 3 are the same? Well, first of all, and that part is very important, it's what I told you before, both are very much concepts under construction, which means that it is normal to some extent that people may have different ideas of what they are, because, to be honest, they are not finished yet. Another reason is that both areas, metaverse and Web3, they converge, they cross over in many different ways. For example, the technology used to build Web3, which includes, as I said before, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, Ethereum, NFTs. Well, this technology will have huge implications, and it's also part of the technologies behind the metaverse. So as you can see, there is a coincidence when it comes to the technologies, to the applications between both ideas. For example, how do they come together, the metaverse and Web3? Well, I mean, one of the most obvious ways is through cryptocurrencies, which are the foundations, or could be the foundations, of the monetary systems in the metaverse. So if the metaverse, you need to think, is a digital equivalent to the real world, it's pretty likely that people will need or will want to go shopping, earn money, create their businesses in there, and it is very likely that they will do so using cryptocurrencies. For example, last year, I remember some reports, there was one by CFTE and many others, were produced on real estate in the metaverse. And it surprised many people to see that people were selling plots of land in the metaverse in exchange for huge amounts of money, right? I mean, I understand that the concept may be shocking. You are used to real estate in the real world. You are buying and selling properties in the real world. You are not selling properties. I mean, in the past, you weren't selling properties in a metaverse, in a virtual world, but this has been happening these last few years. So in order for people to do that, they will need money, and part of this money, of course, can be cryptocurrencies. Another very important element as well of Web3 is NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And NFTs are an important part of the metaverse in most countries as well. So, and then from the point of view of the technologies, Web3 offers the possibility for the very foundations that digital worlds are built on to be built on decentralized platforms. So as you can see, there are many ways in which Web3 and the metaverse converge, right? I mean, it is true that they are not the same. Web3 is this evolution of the internet leveraging blockchain, cryptos, DAOs, etc. Whereas the metaverse is what I said before, those virtual worlds that use many technologies. But some of the technologies used by the metaverse are those technologies that are the core of the Web3. So NFTs, cryptocurrencies. So this is why both areas converge in many ways, even though they are not the same at all, right? So I hope that I made most of the points clear, most of the introductory points. And now the rest of my talk, I'm going to be focusing for the next, 10, 15 minutes on the metaverse in mainland China. And then after that, I would like to open the floor at least for 5 minutes for you to ask me any questions that you may have. Because, well, I know that this part is going to be very interesting to you because at the end of the day, it's a title of my talk, right? The metaverse in China. So the metaverse in China will have unique characteristics. I kind of mentioned that before, because, well, as you know, cryptocurrencies, for example, trading and mining of cryptos are fully banned in mainland China. So this means that one of the key elements of most metaverses, as I said before, I just told you that the metaverse and Web3 are related because metaverses, or the metaverse will normally use cryptocurrencies, NFTs, etc. Well, so the metaverse in China will not include cryptocurrencies because cryptos, as you know, are banned in China. Then NFTs, well, NFTs, yes and no, because as you know, NFTs are highly regulated in China and a bit different from NFTs in other places of the world. So NFTs would be a yes and no. Blockchain, well, I mean, blockchain, you know that China is a very blockchain-friendly country. I mean, you know that. So, I mean, when it comes to blockchain as a technology, China is promoting many projects, etc. That blockchain without cryptos, of course. So, public chain-based models are not encouraged in China because the metaverse in China, or some people call it Chinaverse, even though I prefer to call it metaverse in China, applies consortium chains. So as you can see, this slide, albeit being short, provides some very interesting insights about how the metaverse in China looks like. I mean, there are no cryptos in the metaverse in China. NFTs, yes, but in a different way. Blockchain, yes, but not public chain-based models are encouraged. So as you can see, there are many interesting differences. I mean, given that digital assets are normally a very important part of the metaverse, but cryptos are banned in mainland China, is there a metaverse in mainland China? I asked, and if so, what does it look like? I mean, of course, there is a metaverse in mainland China, a very active one, and it looks like what I said before, and I will say now. The metaverse wave is actually hitting China. Baidu, for example, was the first Chinese tech company to launch a metaverse app in December 2021 called The Land of Hope, which was the first sign that China stepped into the global metaverse market. You can see in here as well, and I didn't say that before, but for this part, I used several reports back in the day. A very interesting one that you can use as well is that one that Faber Novel published last June called Into the Chinaverse. It's a great summary, very visual, very graphic of this topic I'm going to be telling you now about. Well, you can see a bit here about the evolution of the metaverse, both globally, which is the blue dots, and then in China, the red dots as well. So as you can see, well, China perhaps started a bit later than the rest of the world, but then it's actually becoming much more involved later, to the point that the metaverse in China is a very important industry. The metaverse will disrupt many industries. I didn't say that before in detail, but it's important. That's actually quite interesting. I mean, whenever we talk about the metaverse, what usually comes to our mind is gaming, events, music and events, social media to some extent. And well, that is true. But the leverage, please bear in mind that it can leverage many more. The metaverse can leverage many more industries. The metaverse can have an application for financial services, for example, and many more industries. But it is true, nonetheless, that so far the industries that have been more active, more proactive in digging into the metaverse and developing the metaverse have been those that I said: gaming, events, etc. But it can be applied as well to other industries. It can be applied to manufacturing, it can be applied to urban planning, to healthcare, and you will find here some examples of this area in the US and in China, which shows you that both countries and many more countries in the world are actively looking at possible use cases for this for the metaverse in those several industries. China also established 2 years ago the first Metaverse Association, the Metaverse Industry Committee, under the state-supervised China Mobile Communications Association. And as per this report that I told you now, called Into the Chinaverse, 37 million Chinese, 37, online users will have a virtual identity on metaverse platforms by 2025. So I know you can be saying that compared to the total population of China, it may not seem so much, but it's actually a lot of people anyway. And also, more than 500 metaverse companies were named after the metaverse in China, and 93% of them were registered in 2021. And an $8 trillion market value is the estimated market size of the metaverse industry in China, according this time to Morgan Stanley. So as you can see, it's an interesting and relevant industry in China, which will become much more relevant these years to come. I think it's also very important to see that the approach to the metaverse in China has been quite different to other countries, in other ways, not just on the tech side, which I said before, no, when it comes to cryptos, NFTs, but also on whom has decided to take part into the metaverse. In most countries in the world, it's usually larger corporations, gaming companies. In China, not only have companies from large corporations and small firms express interest in the virtual world, but also local administrations have expressed interest. Local governments in Shanghai, Zhejiang, Anhui, Hubei, and Sichuan also incorporated the metaverse in their economic planning documents. Shanghai, for example, was indeed the first city and province in the mainland to include the metaverse in December 2021 in its 14th five-year blueprint for the electronic information industry covering the 2021 and 25 period. And following this, for example, back in April 2022, less than 1 year ago, the Huangpu district of Guangzhou unveiled a proposal for support measures to accelerate the innovation and development of the metaverse. In order to being the first place in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area to provide official assistance dedicated to the metaverse development, including, as you can see, some measures. And Morgan Stanley as well predicted that the space would reach $3 billion users in this industry in the future. So as you can see, I think that what makes the metaverse in China different to the metaverse in other countries is not just when it comes to the tech side, to using cryptos, NFTs, but also to whom has been interested in leveraging the metaverse. You saw many local governments starting to leverage the metaverse for projects on urban planning and other areas. So this public aspect of the metaverse has also been quite emphasized in those projects in China. And well, as I said before, the metaverse has risks. I also covered those before. So in order to tackle those risks, the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission released some reports. And then I think that the metaverse also in China connects with China's bet on artificial intelligence and other technologies like blockchain. Because, digital yuan and many more projects in China shows us that China is at the forefront of these technologies. China is very active on AI, blockchain. So it makes no surprise to see that China is becoming active on the metaverse as well. And I asked before whether there can be a metaverse without cryptocurrencies. And of course, metaverse and cryptos can coexist separately. Otherwise there would be no metaverse in mainland China, right? And moving forward, there are some more stats here below, but I don't think that's so important. What about NFTs in mainland China? Well, as I said before, 2 years ago, crypto mining and trading were prohibited across mainland China for, environmental reasons, to prevent fraud, to prevent money laundering. So NFTs, to some extent, are following a crypto-less path in China. That's why I said before that when we're looking at that slide about what is included and not included in the metaverse in China, I said NFTs, yes and no, a different kind of NFTs, we could say. NFTs are crypto-less in China. NFTs in China serve more as certificates of ownership for digital assets and IP protection. And so this is why NFTs in China are a bit different to NFTs in other places, acting more as collectibles and financial products in China, with all financial NFT products rated for license trading only. So this is why, the NFTs that will be used in the Chinese metaverse, are actually somewhat or quite different to the NFTs used in other metaverses, in other countries. And as I said before, this is already regulated by the government, and then the metaverse is part of China's central plans. I actually already summarized most of this information before, but this is such a graphic way to show it that I decided to keep it. China tech giants are already embracing the trend. So as I said before, the metaverse in China is actually quite diverse. We see local governments, we see smaller firms. We also saw these big tech firms in China embracing this trend. We saw Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, ByteDance, being involved in certain metaverse projects, leveraging, as you can see here, AI, cloud gaming, blockchain, e-commerce, cloud computing, etc. And until June last year, 7 provinces, 17 cities were working on metaverse-related projects. Some of them are working on, as I said before, many different use cases, not just financial-related ones, not just related to urban planning, but also, for example, related to healthcare development. Like, for example, the regional government of Heilongjiang, it's working on a family medical monitor, wearable devices, service robot, elderly care services, Zhejiang as well, AR engine, Shanghai. So as you can see, there are many projects. So to sum up, I would say when it comes to the metaverse in China, that despite the ban of cryptos, China is actually a very blockchain-friendly country. If we understand in this case blockchain as a cryptoless blockchain, right? National and provincial governments in China are unveiling plans to begin intensive development of the metaverse, but also major Chinese big tech companies like Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba are announcing plans to begin developing technologies in order to become key players in the metaverse. And the idea would be this tokenless or cryptoless metaverse ecosystem with unique Chinese characteristics. It is usually or sometimes called as the Chinaverse or the metaverse in China, and it's largely running consortium blockchains developing by the tech giants. And well, however, in recent weeks, there has been an emphasis on a new metaverse concept by the Chinese authorities, which is this idea that you can see here. Use the virtual to enhance the real, use the virtual to strengthen the real. Well, that's a loose summary or translation of that, no, but I think it's quite accurate nonetheless. So the official Chinese approach to the metaverse is going to work totally different to how the metaverse is applied in the rest of the world so far. The focus, as per the official authorities, will be to focus on industrial applications. And that's actually very important because the industrial metaverse will integrate the development of the digital and real economy in China. And we can wonder, how will this impact luxury brands, Web3 activities, and entertainment industry? Well, we don't know yet, but as I said before, one thing that is curious about the metaverse is that even though, to me, one of the best possible use cases of the metaverse could be in industrial applications, in healthcare, in the financial services industry, so far in most of the world, I would say, the metaverse has been leveraged mostly by gaming companies, events companies, etc. So China will focus, or the official authorities are trying to put the focus more on industrial applications, on developing the real economy through the metaverse. Does it mean that the activities of luxury brands and the events industry will be killed because of that? No, I mean, not necessarily. I'm not saying that, but the official focus will be more on the real economy, on the real side of the economy, on industrial applications. And now one or two quick ideas when it comes to the metaverse in Hong Kong before wrapping up, but in just maybe like 1 or 2 minutes so we can have some time to solve the questions. Well, the metaverse in Hong Kong is booming, of course. I mean, I'm sure that you already know that. I'm sure that you all have attended or at least seen like lots of conferences and events in Hong Kong focusing on the metaverse and NFTs. I mean, I cannot count how many events I've seen in Hong Kong in the last 2 or 3 years, right, focusing on these areas. But I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot, and even now that Hong Kong has fully reopened, the amount will be much higher even. So, I mean, there's no doubt that these industries are booming in Hong Kong. The metaverse in Hong Kong is very different from that in mainland China in the sense that, as you know, Hong Kong's approach to cryptocurrencies, Web3, is actually very different, especially since last November, because in our October, November, as you know, in day one of the Hong Kong FinTech Week, there were some announcements made by the Financial Services and Treasury Bureau, FSTB, in Hong Kong, which have to some extent changed the approach to cryptos. As you know, now retail investors will be allowed to trade cryptos in Hong Kong. And well, I think that all these announcements put together show us a clear interest in Hong Kong in order to become, or maybe I should say re-become, a very important crypto and Web3 and digital assets hub, which China is not, because as you know, mainland China decided to follow a different approach. So this is why the metaverse in Hong Kong will, of course, look very different to that in China. It will, of course, be intertwined in certain aspects, but when it comes to cryptos, Web3, it would, of course, be quite different. You can see here as well a written reply by the Secretary for Innovation, Professor Dong, in Hong Kong to the Honorable Tan Yu Heng, in which it was admitted that Hong Kong possesses excellent information and IT environments and robust infrastructures, which can facilitate local industries to develop technologies related to the metaverse. So I think Hong Kong has the right elements to leverage the metaverse. And this is also an interesting survey made by Ipsos, in which people in Hong Kong, I think it was 1,000 people in Hong Kong, were asked about their knowledge of the metaverse and the enabling technologies. And it is interesting to see that in the span that goes from May until September last year, these 4 months, the amount of people that knew about the metaverse, about cryptos and about NFTs increased. Actually, if you look at NFTs, only 2% more of people learned about them in that period. But when it comes to the metaverse, it went from 49% to 64%, according to that survey. So as you can see, it's the thing that whose interest or knowledge increased the most. You can see here some summarized ideas of that report. And you can check that report online if you want. I think it's actually quite interesting. Of course, it's not an overview of the industry. No, I mean, it's not an overview of the key players, regulations, but it is interesting for you to get to see how well aware people in Hong Kong are of these new areas. And actually, the percentage of awareness is actually quite high. I mean, when it comes to some specific platforms, maybe the awareness is not that high, but it's quite high nonetheless. And as you know, many local brands in Hong Kong launch experiences in the metaverse. Ocean Park, HSBC, South China Morning Post. And you can see here the amount of respondents who are aware of those activities. And it may seem low to some of you, but I think it's actually quite high, right? I mean, I think compared to, I'm sure if Ipsos did the same survey in other countries, I'm not sure if they did, but if they did, I think that the results in Hong Kong are actually quite good and quite high. This is just one more example of how Hong Kong or companies in Hong Kong are leveraging the metaverse. For example, MTR. MTR became the world's first transport operator to enter the sandbox metaverse. So as you can see, this is a very thriving industry in Hong Kong. So without further ado, this puts an end to my webinar, to my presentation. I know it was very long, and I apologize for that. There was a lot to cover. So now in 5 minutes or so, if you have like any important questions, please feel free to ask. And if you don't, I will be sharing those reports with you, and you can always reach out to me afterwards. Of course, I cannot predict what China will do, but if you ask my opinion on this, no, I don't think that China will reverse its ban on cryptocurrencies at all. I mean, because of many reasons. I would say that, first of all, as you know, China is betting hard on the digital yuan, even though CBDCs are not cryptocurrencies. I know they serve different purposes, they are launched differently, but still, they are betting hard and strong on the digital yuan, first of all. And then cryptocurrencies, they require, as you know, an intensive regulation. They pose some threats and risks. And as you know as well, the Chinese financial system has been having some issues this past decades. For example, shadow banking. I was in this same room at Hong Kong University giving a talk about the shadow banking system in China back in September 2017. I would say the shadow banking system in China has improved. No, I mean, it's not such an issue maybe compared to a few years ago, but still the Chinese financial system had some issues like shadow banking. You know, it was difficult for companies to get loans because most of the loans went to bigger corporations. So for SMEs, it was difficult. So my point is, China needs financial stability. So I don't think they will make the move of allowing cryptos or becoming a crypto hub or anything like that, because the current situation actually works quite well for China. And I would say that especially now that Hong Kong being part of China and being a very important part of the GBA, Hong Kong is actually going to become a crypto hub, a Web3 hub, even much more than before. So I think that especially now that Hong Kong will leverage Web3 and the digital assets industry so much and so intensely, it becomes even less interesting for China to allow cryptos, because China at the end of the day can always use Hong Kong in that sense. So I don't think that will happen. Well, I would say that I mean, the metaverse has, as I said before, several risks, and privacy is of course one of them. It's still a very early stage, infant nature, so it is difficult to summarize all the risks or how they will pan out, they will be applied into practice. Digital identity is of course risky. So I mean, in the current state of development, I would say that you cannot rely just on the regulations or just on the platforms. You will also need to rely on yourself in the sense that you will need to be careful as for what information you are sharing, because it is still a very infant stage industry. So of course there are issues, and I think it still requires like this multi-pronged approach in which I think the users will need to collaborate a bit as well now and make sure that they are acting properly, not giving out too much, because it's still not maybe well regulated enough, generally speaking. I think that the metaverse in China and that in mainland China, that in Hong Kong, will be different for the reasons I said before. So it is true that to some extent there can be a parallel development, but not so parallel. I mean, my point, for example, look at the fintech industry. Fintech industry in Hong Kong is quite different from that in mainland China. Yes, I know that there are things in common. No, I mean, and virtual banking has been developed intensely in both places. But if you look at the industry, even though Hong Kong wasn't that active in the crypto and Web3 spaces as few years, they were allowed in Hong Kong, whereas China banned them 2 years ago. So the development can be to some extent parallel, of course, because Hong Kong is part of the GBA, etc., etc. But I would say that the development, generally speaking, will be quite different. I mean, as you saw, for example, development in China focused more on either big techs or local governments leveraging healthcare applications, urban planning applications. In Hong Kong, perhaps it will be much more Web3 oriented, digital assets oriented. So I would say that even though, of course, one can always learn from the other or benefit in some ways, or certain platforms in mainland China can always go to Hong Kong to maybe leverage more the Web3 aspects, I would say that generally speaking, the developments of both industries will be a different, parallel in many ways, but different. They will follow a different path. I think that to some extent we are already in this multiverse scenario.
Yeah.
I said there is just one metaverse in the same way that there is just one internet, but you have like many websites, for example, and many apps. So the idea here is the same. There is one metaverse because the metaverse is one thing, but then there are like many different platforms, many different approaches to the metaverse depending on the country. So we are already in this multiverse situation. I mean, it's very different if you use, for example, the sandbox than if you use Decentraland, than if you use, for example, certain metaverses in mainland China. So we're already in this multiverse scenario. If we understand that multiverse implies different platforms, different approaches, different regulations within this umbrella term that we can call the metaverse.